Trust me, I did. And what I saw there shook me and stayed with me. And I'm saying that literally. It was the first time I got what I like to call a blemish. And that's what happens when a part of me is stained forever. But before I get to that, who even wants to visit Death Valley in the winter? The only thing it's famous for is being so damn hot. I can't imagine anybody making plans to go in, say, December of a given year. I mean, you would have to be bonkers. Enter my mom, who in the middle of December on a Friday evening, sprung it on my dad and that we would be taking a family trip that weekend to, and you guessed it, Death Valley. Now mind you, I didn't know a damn thing about Death Valley, and my dad probably did, but he had learned over the years not to poo-poo ideas my mom was enthusiastic about. And also understand that this wasn't a normal family outing. I was 13, my boyfriend had just died, and even though you might think that I should be the one taking it the hardest, my mom was falling apart over the entire ordeal. I can't say if she was falling apart in earnest, or if the news gave her an outlet to fall apart, even to feign falling apart. My mom's complicated, as cynical as it sounds, and I wouldn't put it past her to capitalize on something like that. But if there's proof that it was truly grief, then this trip was it. It seemed as if she didn't know what to do with herself, and the idea of being with me over yet another weekend, where all I did was stay at home depressed, was probably too much for her. I have to get her out of the house, she must have been thinking, and get her mind off everything. Well, it worked, but for all of the wrong reasons. We got in the car early Saturday and headed on over. I'll spare you the many cringy pains I went through on that car ride, but let me say that there was palpable irony in the fact that in order to get me out of the house, we ended up spending hours stuck in a car, which was not much larger on the inside than a small closet. And of course, as you guessed, we discovered some things fairly quickly. 1. My mom did not know anything about Death Valley before she got there. How does that happen? And don't ask me. She expressed great dismay that there was nothing to do there, and that the main reason to go was to experience the summer heat. When the employee at the information desk clarified that December tended to be one of their slower months, my mom's anxiety rose through the roof. Heat, that's all I'm hearing, she finally interrupted, flailing her arms around melodramatically. Tell me what we can do now. She snatched randomly at a pamphlet below the counter, and she just happened to pull up the worst possible one. Badwater Basin? What is that? She demanded. The employee told us that it was the lowest geological point in North America, a giant concave dimple on the earth. In other words, that it was a popular tourist destination that was open, even in December. He was a really polite worker, and I felt terrible that my mom was plastering her frustration all over him. He had a nice, mellow, brownish aura, and with each exasperated question my mom delivered, I saw it get rattled. Like a lake of still water that's getting pebbles thrown into it. Without much more than a hasty goodbye, my mom snatched me by the hand and headed for the car. My poor dad, gave a quick apology to the employee and trailed behind. I can't imagine the relationship, to be honest, my mom and dad. He always seems like he's along for the ride, and he's such a sweet dad, always in good spirits. I would die if I had to live like that, and yet as long as I can remember, he had this kind of zen attitude about the whole thing. But look at me, I'm getting way off track. Let me make it clear that I had no interest in seeing Badwater Basin. And to me, it just sounded like a big hole in the ground. Not even a hole really, just a big, dimple. I mean, I can picture that just fine without the long drive. But as of now, we were only about a mile out and heading straight for it. And this is when stuff got weird. I was used to using my special gift of seeing people's auras, but I wasn't used to seeing auras just floating around completely unattached to human beings. But even a mile out, as my dad turned to me and he said, "Oh, just up ahead, honey." And I looked through the front windshield. I saw some swirling trails of auras off in the distance. "I bet it's packed with people," I said. "I doubt it, honey. The information center is empty." My dad responded in his characteristically mellow tone. "But who knows?" It wasn't until we reached the parking lot that I realized for sure that something wasn't right. Not a single car was parked anywhere, and yet the trail of auras that floated up and out of the basin suggested that there must have been a zillion people down there. We parked and I was the first out of the car. "I can't wait to see it," I said quickly, prying the door open in haste and bolting from the car. Mom and Dad thought somehow that I had gotten an instantaneous urge for geology. But in truth, my curiosity was piqued by these colorful sprouts and swirls of auras that wafted just over the basin. But as I reached the edge of the parking lot and I looked down into the basin, I was dismayed not to find another human being down there. On the contrary, what I saw was a sea of multicolored auras, like a giant slush that was swirled and ebbed and flowed. It was like a lake, steaming some trails up into the air, and none of it made a shred of sense to me. "Come on, honey, let's get down there," my dad said behind me. Apparently they had caught up to where I was already. "Honey?" he asked again, somewhat disconcerted. "She's been like this for 20 minutes," my mom's exasperated voice shrieked. I snapped my head back in surprise. "Addie, are you alright?" my father asked, putting his hand on my shoulder. 20 minutes? Was that true? It felt like I had just glanced at the ominous lake for a second. I knew that my mom exaggerated all the time, but let's say that she did. 20 minutes in mom time was at least 10 minutes. Had I really tranced out for 10 minutes? I felt like I had just looked at it for a second. "Oh, I'm fine," I said back cheerfully. No need to worry them, I figured. And there was no way to explain what was bothering me anyway. They would have just thought that I'd gone crazy. Or crazier, depending on which of the two you'd ask. "Great then, let's go down and check it out," my dad said again, patting me on the back. Down there? I thought. That's the last place that I wanted to be. All of my experiences with colorful auras have been absolute disasters for me, and this looked like a veritable smorgasbord of crap that I had no intention of walking into. "I'll stay here for a little while," I said after a moment. "Suit yourself," my dad said cheerfully. "I'll go make sure that there aren't any monsters down there. How about that?" My God, the irony was overwhelming. My parents made their way down into the basin, and with each step further down, I saw the swirl get disturbed more and more. It was like as if they were wading into a shallow water pool that moved as if it was in low gravity. Each step disturbed it more, and kicked up more auras that now revealed themselves to be quite brilliant in color. At the bottom of all the auras, strange bright letters appeared. So strange that the first impulse I had was to write it down as best I could. What it meant, I had no idea. But the letters glimmered in bright bands and seemed to be themselves auras, just constrained into letter form. They were covered up mostly, but my parents kicking up a swirl of auras revealed them to me. Also, by this point in my life, I realized that auras were a lot like reptiles. The most beautiful ones were likely to kill you if you got close. But what I didn't ever see was an aura without a human, and the thought alone gave me grave concerns. "Come on in, honey," my dad now yelled from the middle of the basin. "The water's fine." It was as if even without my gift of seeing auras, he was accidentally making dad jokes. Meta-dad jokes. The next frontier of driving your kids crazy. Just let her be. And my mom shushed him quickly. She's going through a lot. He shrugged his shoulders and kicked around at the ground as he stood there. What I saw next, I'd never seen before. The auras down by his feet started to swirl with much more energy, specifically around him. They passed through my mom like she wasn't even there. And in their swirling, they climbed up, higher and higher around his legs. I wanted to scream for him to get out, but at the same time, I had been on my best behavior so that my parents didn't think I was going nuts from the stress of my boyfriend's death. I hesitated, and it was as if the pool of auras sensed that immediately, because within a second at most, they had suddenly enveloped my dad entirely. "Jim!" My mom shrieked. "Jim!" My dad, who I only saw as a silhouette of various colors, collapsed abruptly. While my mom saw none of this, she did see him fall over and immediately rushed to his side. And without another thought, I ran as fast as I could towards him. The lettering disappeared completely, but under my feet as I ran, I saw new letters came up all around me. Running into that pool of auras isn't anything I'd have done in any other circumstance, but it's one of those things when you see somebody you love in danger. I had almost forgotten that they were there. As I ran in, I felt chills along my body as they lapped up against me. But I got a hold of my dad and I told my mom we had to pull him in the car. We hoisted him up and with one of us under each arm, we half dragged, half hobbled him all the way from the basin. With each step out of there, I felt the chills subsiding, and once he was in the car, he started to come to. "Where am I?" he mumbled incoherently. Before I could answer, my mom had started the car and slammed on the gas. We got to the nearest hospital in what I assumed must have been record time. But after many hours of waiting, we discovered nothing wrong with him. The doctors assumed, based on what my mom had told him, that he had had a panic attack. My dad, a panic attack. How absurd, I thought. He was the most mellow person that I ever knew. But for my mom, the thought gave her pause. My boyfriend dying, everybody being on edge, and my dad was the rock that kept it together. No matter how down I was or how frantic my mom became in the weeks and months after Billy died, it was always something that we could lean on. And one thing is true for all rocks, my mom now realized. Even the hardest ones break under enough pressure. It was late by the time we had finished at the hospital and my mom decided to get a hotel for the night, rather than deal with the several-hour car ride back home. We checked in at a little place just next to Badwater Basin for the night, and my dad by this point was more or less back to himself, though he was a little fatigued. But for me, there was something more sinister at play. My mom and dad have regular, healthy, benign auras. My dad's is richly yellow, like a sun, and my mom's is a more muddled yellow-brown. But as we sat there in the hotel room, I saw my dad's aura on full display. And right by his chest, where his heart should have been, there was a little round blotch of his aura that was solid lilac. It pulsed the way a heart pulses, and it scared the shit out of me. I wondered if it had to do with the lettering I had seen at the Basin earlier, and while I couldn't pull out my notebook and start researching it in front of my parents, I did intend to do that as soon as I possibly could, because whatever was stuck on my dad's chest, completely unknown to him but almost blinding to me, it needed to get away. And I knew it could have only come from that basin, and I had a feeling deep in my gut that it would grow and destroy him. Lilac was the one color I had figured out by that point, and everything about it was malevolent, malicious, and dangerous. And I knew that night, when everybody else had gone to sleep, I would need to sneak out of that hotel room and get back to the basin and face whatever was in there, or at the very least understand it, so that I could get this damn thing away from my dad for good. Because the only reason that any of us were here was because of me. because of how much they wanted me to get my mind off of Billy's death. And now here we were, my dad poisoned and my mom frantic, and a pool in a basin that only I could see was threatening the only good man I had left in my life. I waited for everybody to go to sleep, and then I left that hotel to face the unknown that swirled and pooled just a ways down the road. After many hours, my mom finally went to sleep for the night. I thought I was going to be stuck playing as if I was sleeping for the whole evening. Whether through sheer nerves or just restlessness, she just wouldn't go down. By the time she finally did, it was 3:30 a.m. I carefully sat up, and without making so much as a peep, I gingerly climbed off the couch that I had been laying on. I even tried to control my breathing so not to make that much of a sound, and I carefully fumbled for my cell phone. I had to look up that lettering that I had seen earlier. I had no intention of going back to that basin without a little bit of information about the lettering. And if something was trying to communicate with me, then I had to know what it was. But the research didn't come easy. What I was able to figure out at the very least was that the lettering I had seen appeared to be in the language Timbisha. A quick Google search revealed that this was the ancestral language of the Native Americans that went by the same name, and that it was for all intents and purposes a dead or very dying language. And most frustratingly, there existed no translation dictionaries that I could find for it. I looked at the lettering carefully. No matter what order I put it in, nothing seemed to come up. My best guess was that it had something to do with numbers. But which numbers? And what number could possibly shine light on any of this? One thing I did find with the other TVs, however, was what the other lettering, the one that flashed around me as I ran through that basin to my collapsed father, meant. That was an easy search. Danger. That's all it meant. And that wasn't exactly news that put me in a positive state of mind. But what could I do? As I glanced over at my sleeping father, I saw a subdued, bright yellow aura lay over him, like a sheath. It glowed out even through the heavy hotel blanket, and in the middle of the blanket, I saw too the lilac glow of that blotch, that blemish as I call them. I squinted my eyes and I looked carefully. It had gotten bigger. I saw someone with a pure lilac aura once. That person nearly killed me, and had nothing but malice in them. Could that happen to my dad? And to the kindest, nicest, and most loving human being that I'd ever met. He was literally the picture of unconditional love. And lilac suggested anger too. My dad was never angry. In fact, the only time I ever saw him get angry, it was for my benefit. I remember once that I had gone into the city without him to go shopping, and somebody had said something nasty to me. I didn't even know who it was, but it looked like a homeless person. And then my dad got very angry, but even so, it was for me, and not to me. Yet here he was, slowly getting overtaken by a blemish of pure lilac. I knew no matter the danger, I had to get out to that basin to see what was down there. And so I did. I gingerly opened the hotel door, being careful of the hallway lights. I opened it just enough to squeeze through, and then I closed it excruciatingly slow, just to not make a sound. Once that soft click of the door latch locking finished, I waited to make sure that nobody on the inside had stirred from the sound. I pressed my ear against the door, but all was quiet. And then hastily, I turned and I rushed out of that hotel. The lobby worker hardly glanced in my direction as I casually walked out of the door. Now let me tell you, for a place known as the hottest place in the world, Death Valley is freezing cold in the winter. I walked out of that door and it felt like I'd been dunked under ice water. Pure pain everywhere, on my face, my exposed arms, and the back of my neck. Within moments, my nose started running from the cold. But I pushed forward into a jog. The basin wasn't far, and even from my vantage point in the dark night sky, I could see the trails of auras off in the distance. It was even easier to see them in the nighttime. It wasn't until I reached the edge of the basin that I noticed something new. The pool of auras wasn't swishing and swashing around like it was earlier. Rather, it was still, like a frozen lake. It almost looked as if there was a sheath over it. Like a lake that starts to freeze in early winter. Just a little half-inch of still. But underneath, a tumult of colorful motion. Those bright and vivid auras seemed to swirl just beneath the surface, and tubble against each other endlessly. The entire surface seemed to flex periodically, as if it was about to erupt. I neared it warily with short and slow steps until I was just standing at its edge. Beneath the tumbling colors, I saw that familiar lettering again, now almost completely obscured. I knew that I had to get in there, to the center, to look at that lettering up close. At the same time, I didn't know how I was going to be able to do that. I tried to walk forward gently, just touching the edge of the aura lake with my foot. Surprisingly, it was hard as stone. I took a step and then another. And the closer I got towards the center, the warmer that I became. It was strange, but after the first 8 feet or so, the temperature felt downright comfortable. 70 degrees or so tops. But with each step it got hotter, and hotter and hotter. I was about 2/3 the way towards the middle, and the temperature now felt like it was in the middle 90s. And because I had walked so slowly, I was in a full sweat. The ground, or should I say that hard sheath of auras, was starting to flex out now much more frequently, and more violently. It popped up and down, and at times I felt like I was going to fall over, but I just kept going forward. And as I got right near the middle, I saw those letters glimmering out from beneath the tumult. And they shined bright, and the floor began rumbling now harder than it had before. I started to lose my footing, and I stumbled back and forth as I tried to stay upright. A big shake came in and I fell hard, embracing myself with my hand, but just as I did so, I heard an immensely loud cracking, like a whip snapping. To my horror, I looked at my wrist and I found that I had cracked through that hard sheath. And before I finally realized what had happened, those violently and bright auras were spiraling up my forearm. They were ice cold and enveloped my arm almost instantly. I felt a chill scream through my body and my chest seized up, as it paralyzed. I tried to jerk my hand back, to kick and pound away at the floor around me, but it was no use. I had been trapped, and the more that I struggled, the harder the grip of that slush of auras became. I felt it start to rumble below me, and I saw between the commotion the bright lettering just beneath me. I got angry, more angry than I had ever been, at this stupid slush and the thought that my dad might have gone through this himself, and I'd not even realized it. I got mad and I decided I was going to shove my arm down that hole. If it wasn't going to let go of me, I resolved that it would have to deal with me the hard way. I thrusted my arm deep into that cracked hole, splintering shards off in every direction, and I plunged it down towards those bright shining letters. With a final thrust, I reached down and I snatched at one of the letters. It was a P, and I grabbed it in my hand. The auras swirled faster and faster. Just as my energy was about to give up, I moved it at one final time and everything froze. I looked beneath me and every bright little streak of color had stopped in place. And just as quickly as it had stopped, it started disintegrating. I felt myself sinking and sinking into the empty space created by each disintegrating chunk of that basin, until I finally just found myself laying on the dirt floor. Even the brightest and most violent auras seemed to flow away into the ground. I must have passed out from exhaustion because the next thing I remember is a reflection of sunlight in my eyes. As I opened them, I saw it was coming off one of those letters that were bright in the evening just before. It couldn't have been later than 6 or 7 in the morning, and for the first time, I realized that those letters were real. They were metal, or so it seemed, almost like they were bolted to the ground. I got up, dusted myself off, and I studied them carefully. I still had no idea what they meant, but I knew that something about them had saved me from that mess of ores that had nearly snatched me up entirely. I wanted to inspect them more, but as the sun kept rising, I knew that it was time to go home. I jogged through the cold back to the hotel, and luckily my parents were still asleep. Even better, my dad's blemish seemed to be gone. His aura was that same bright, happy and rich yellow that I had known my whole life. I quickly changed my clothes and I pretended to be sleeping, and amazingly, no one was the wiser when my parents woke up. Except for one thing. My dad insisted that we go back to the Basin. "I'm telling you, honey, I feel fine, but I just have to check that place out again," he kept insisting to my mom. "Dad, let's just go," I said, exhausted, as we prepared to check out of the hotel. "It's about facing your fears, sweetie," he said gently. We did go, and it was actually quite interesting. We stayed to read every plaque, and we learned a great deal about the so-called Badwater Basin. But one thing we didn't learn about were those letters, because by the time we got back there, just a few hours after my early morning wake-up, they were gone. Nowhere to be found, not a trace of them anywhere. And where they went is a mystery I never solved. But I'm only 16 yet, and it's on my bucket list. Or if any of you can help, comment below and maybe we can figure this out together. For now, I just wanted to let you know that that blemish on my dad never came back. And I've never seen anything like what I saw at Badwater Basin since. I feel like there's some sort of connection with that hole in my town, or somehow these things must be related to being underground. Most of my experiences with intense aura energy have been underground or in caves. Oh, and just a heads up. By all means, go and visit Death Valley, but do it in the summer. And if you're feeling woozy about Badwater Basin, don't test your luck.